Please join me in welcoming Governor Coomaraswamy of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Governor Coomaraswamy became the governor a few months ago in July 2006. He has a very distinguished career both at the Central Bank and at the Commonwealth Secretariat. He's got Cambridge, Universities of Cambridge, and did his PhD at the University of Sussex. He's a very seasoned central banker, and he's here to talk about what's going on in Sri Lanka, policies, prospects. As you know, Sri Lanka came out of a long-standing civil war last year with a new government and a new energy, I think, for reforms. The macro is improving, the politics are improving, and it's benefiting from low commodity prices, so it's well positioned to take off over the years to come. So please join me in welcoming the governor. Good to have you here with us, Governor. What I thought we would do is have you lead off and talk for about 15 minutes or so on policies, prospects, reforms, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, and I hope you have lots of questions for the governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very well, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta. First, let me apologize for the frog in my throat, which I seem to have picked up on the flight across from Colombo. But it's good to be with you. I thank the IIF for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. What I propose to do is initially to give you some color in terms of the background landscape within which one needs to assess Sri Lanka's performance at this conjuncture, and then talk a little bit about the growth model we are trying to put in place, some of the macroeconomic challenges that we are addressing, some of the structural issues, and then maybe also some comments about how we've been interacting with the international capital markets. So the background landscape, Sri Lanka, the narrative on Sri Lanka in a way goes against the grain in the sense that it's a good news story at a time when there are a number of rather adverse developments around the country. Why does one say that Sri Lanka is a good news story? Well, after the conflict, now we have peace. We have no threats in terms of security. The risks and uncertainties associated with the economy are being managed. Democracy is being strengthened, the rule of law, rights. On all those fronts, Sri Lanka is making progress. So at this point, there's enormous amount of goodwill towards Sri Lanka. Whether it's in Asia, the West, it is this goodwill that the authorities in Sri Lanka are trying to leverage at this point. So that's really the kind of landscape against which you need to look at Sri Lanka today. So what about the growth model? Sri Lanka has averaged 6% growth since the conflict ended in 2009. In the period 2010 to 2015, there's been 6% growth. But that growth, at the end of the war, the authorities were under pressure to deliver a peace dividend quickly. So the model that drove that growth was not sustainable. It was really public investment in infrastructure, financed largely by foreign commercial borrowing. Now, the headroom for further borrowing is limited, so we need now to put in place a growth model that's more sustainable, which will give us sustained 7-8% growth over the medium to long term. And we are confident we can achieve that. But what is that growth model that we are putting in place? It is a private sector-led growth strategy with exports and FDI as key pillars. That's nothing new. I've been a public service all my life, so I'm not ideological in terms of thinking that there is a magic in the private sector all the time. But from a pragmatic perspective, Sri Lanka does not have the fiscal space for a statist strategy of development. As you know, different models have delivered good development outcomes around the world. But for Sri Lanka at the moment, the debt and fiscal deficit dynamics are such that we need to have a private sector-led growth strategy. And that's what we are now putting in place. And that strategy, given a market of 21 million people, clearly has to have exports at the heart of it. And if one looks around the world, the empirical evidence overwhelmingly suggests that transformation in export performance is almost invariably linked to attracting FDI. So these are our priorities: to have a private sector-led growth strategy, to have exports very much at the heart of that strategy, and to recognize the importance of FDI and to create the conditions for FDI to come into the country. There are those who say, is this the right time? The new normal is low growth in the global economy, sluggish trade. Is this export-led, FDI-driven model really going to give you much mileage at this time? And the answer we give to them is that there are two factors. One is Sri Lanka's strategic location. Sri Lanka is 20 miles from India, which is, by common consensus, going to be the fastest growing large economy going forward. And we are right in the middle of China's maritime Silk Route. So the strategic location. For millennia, Sri Lankans have been traders in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And that's what we want to go back to become a hub in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So the strategic location, plus, as I said before, the tremendous amount of goodwill there is for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has excellent relations with the capital surplus countries in East and Southeast Asia, and it has got good relations with the advanced world. So that can be leveraged to take advantage of our location, to take advantage of the new policies we are putting in place. I think that will help us to overcome the drag of a global economy. And let me now quickly go through some of the highlights in terms of the government's major development programs. There is a very large multidimensional project in the area around Colombo, the capital. It's called the Western Region Megapolis Plan. It envisages investment of about $45 billion over 15 years. It's got transport and other infrastructure. It's got residential and commercial real estate. It's got a logistical hub joining the port and airport. There's a tech city. So there's a range of things. It's a 15-year program. Surbana Jurong, the Singaporean consultancy, did the master plan, and that master plan is now being rolled out. And much of it, as I said, given the lack of fiscal space, much of this has to be driven by private capital. So it will be direct investment as well as PPPs, various forms of PPPs, including BOTs. The other, and in Colombo again, a Chinese concern is reclaiming 260 hectares of sea. It's going to be called the Colombo International Financial Center. Again, it's a multi-use development, but within it will be located an international financial center operating under UK law, and it'll be an offshore operation. So that's what's happening in the western province of Sri Lanka, the area around Colombo. Now there are two landmarks, if you may want to keep your eye on as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. The Prime Minister is due to deliver what is being called his 1,500-day plan, which will set out the direction over the next 5 years. And that should happen within the next couple of weeks. And then the Finance Minister will deliver the budget for 2017 on the 10th of November. So those two documents, I think, should set out very clearly. There will be greater clarity in terms of the way forward, in terms of direction. And of course, the IMF program is a litmus test for potential investors. If that remains on track, clearly, that's a seal of good housekeeping. Finally, if I may say just a couple of words in terms of our engagement with capital markets. Sri Lanka issued a dual tranche sovereign bond on the 11th of July. The actual price came in about 30 basis points below guidance. And since then, I think my colleague checked, the Deputy Governor checked as we were coming here, it's trading about 100 basis points tighter. So clearly we are very pleased about the positive sentiment that seems to be out there in markets towards Sri Lanka. We are also interested in doing some liability management. We have a bunching of some debt payments that need to be managed. So we're looking around to see how best we can undertake some liability management. So with that, let me, I should also say, as part of these large programs, I did say that much of it will be private capital. There will be some PPPs. The state will also play a bit of a role. And the state is looking for structured financing products so that it can undertake its share of the investment off the government balance sheet.
While you're thinking about your questions, if somebody had a question? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Kotacha, Structured Credit International, New York. I was quite impressed with your presentation. It's very positive, and I would just say that, just by observation before the question, that if the bonds tightened 100 basis points, the pricing wasn't terribly smart to begin with, but that's another issue. The question is, the government is looking for structured products, structured financing. Could you elaborate on what kind of, what you mean by that? Is that project finance? Is that securitization of your government receivables? Or what have you, what kind of things are you talking about?
The answer is both. Both. They're looking for securitization, certainly say on some of the highway projects in particular. They're looking to create an SPV and are looking for opportunities for securitization, and they're also looking for structured financing as part of project funding as well. So they're open to, you know, they're really looking around really for off-balance sheet sources of finance.
Any other questions? Yeah, please.
What is the thinking behind the International Financial Center? I mean, why do you think that we need another one in the world? And also, who is financing that project?
It's going to be located in the area that's being reclaimed through a Chinese development. And the government will set up the infrastructure. We think, given our location, particularly vis-a-vis India. I know Dubai is on one side and Singapore is on the other, but we think we can have a cost advantage over both those locations. And so we want to set up really a world-class facility. It will be under, as I said, UK law, and on the basis of cost initially at least, and really our proximity to India, particularly, you know, if you look at the 5 states of southern India and the buoyancy that has been in those states, we think, given our location 20 miles away, that there must be opportunities, not just in terms of the financial services, but also in terms of supply chains, you know, and value chains. If the Make in India strategy gains momentum, one can replicate what has happened in East and Southeast Asia as first Japan and then China took off. A lot of the countries in the region, sub-regions, were able to benefit by linking into those value chains. And we feel that there's going to be an opportunity, both in terms of financial services as well as other areas. You see, in the past, though we had proximity, infrastructure in both countries was so bad that transaction costs are very high. But what you're now seeing is infrastructure improving in both countries. And so for the first time, one can really leverage the proximity we have to India.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, let me ask you a question, Governor. You know, part of your remit at the central bank is, of course, financial stability, but also inflation and growth a little bit too. So from your perch at the central bank, you know, inflation was high earlier this year, but it seems to be turning around. And if you see more of a supply side response, how are you looking at inflation and monetary policy sort of over the near term?
Well, as I said, the challenge in terms of monetary policy has been the excess aggregate demand coming out of the budget.
Right.
So if the trajectory of fiscal consolidation that we envisage continues, and we are hopeful and we are fairly confident that it will, then I think that the conditions will be created to have, as I said, stable and relatively low nominal interest rates. Of course, one has to respond to exogenous factors which are beyond our control in terms of capital movements, etc. But the challenge really has been this excess demand, that has been there in the system, out of the fiscal operations.
Sure.
And once that is really pulled out, we feel we can conduct a monetary policy which, even today, though we've increased the policy rates by about 100 basis points, 250 basis points increases, as well as the statutory 150 basis point increase in the statutory reserve during the course of this year. But despite that, broad money, we kind of target a monetary aggregate. It's growing at about 17-18%, whereas nominal GDP is growing around 10%. So there is enough space. From the point of view of growth, there is enough space. Now the challenge is to get the confidence of the domestic private sector activated, and we are hopeful that the measures that are being put in place, and with the Prime Minister's statement and the budget, etc., all that coming together, going forward, we anticipate the domestic private sector. They're pretty cash rich.
They are pretty cash rich, right?
Yeah.
As in other parts of the world. Any more questions for the Governor? We are out of. Thank you, Governor.
Okay, let me pick up on your thing.
Yeah.
I really should have emphasized the skill side. We have, Sri Lanka has been an overachiever in terms of human development. In fact, the gap between Sri Lanka's ranking on the Human Development Index and per capita GNI is about 29. We are 29 places. And that is the second biggest gap of any country. So there is a very strong human development base. We're in the process of trying to align our kind of dynamic comparative advantage, the labor market, and our education, training, and skills development. So we're doing a lot of effort into that. So hopefully that side of it is being looked after.
Is financial inclusion a big part of your strategy as
well? It is. We're fortunate because it's a fairly literate population. There's mobile phone telephony is over 100%. People are used to dealing with the financial services providers because of remittances. Remittances are about 10% of GDP.
Yes, absolutely.
And so people have got used to interacting with providers. So, and we're trying to use that as a base to introduce new systems.
Thank you, Governor. We are out of time for that wonderful exposition, both not only of the macro story, but also the structural reforms going forward. Please join us in giving the Governor a hand.